Oh man, it's gonna be a fun one. What was the impetus behind taking time out to write?
I mean, I could barely get my mother-in-law and my dog to read it. I fully believe that you only rent an idea until you teach somebody else. Nobody cared about my crappy business ideas, but what they liked was the way that I talked about metrics and the way that I explained financial concepts in plain English. 62,000 subscribers today.
When did you learn and how did you learn what people really wanted versus what you were sending them?
I was writing for like this fictional smart person that I thought was out there, what this person looked like, what they read each morning, where they maybe lived in the world, what types of companies they worked for. Write really selfishly, but then give away very generously.
Where do you start with content ideas? You email a pretty decent amount.
I just listen to other podcasts. I read other newsletters. Biggest hack has been starting a podcast because I can invite people on who are smarter than myself.
Any strategies or tips people can utilize?
Well, the first thing I would do is...
All right, welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman, and today we are joined by CJ Gustafson with mostlymetrics.com. CJ, welcome on board.
So pumped to be here. Thanks for having me, Jared.
Oh man, this is gonna be a fun one. It's been a little while since we really knuckled down on this newsletter concept, and I love your story because when you share with us what you're doing with your newsletter and your brand, Mostly Metrics, we're going to think that it's a full-time gig, and yet it's not even a full-time thing for you. It's kind of what you do on the side. So, man, I'm so excited to get into it. But kind of before we do, I kind of buried the lead a bit. Tell us about who you are, your backstory, and then kind of what got you into this newsletter, this mostlymetrics.com brand that we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, totally. And so you're actually catching me on day 2 of going all in. So I recently just left my job as a tech CFO. We successfully sold the company, which is exciting. Gave me a bit of credibility after having some imposter syndrome as a younger CFO for a while. But this
Congrats.
is now, yeah,
it's fresh.
I guess I'm breaking the news on your podcast, Jared.
You should
Pretty
be
cool.
on a beach right now. You should not be here.
No, I have too many newsletters to write.
There you go. Okay, so good.
I'm a tech CFO by trade. I did consulting straight out of college at BC, and then I did private equity. And both of those, I think I was probably like a C- at. But hey, they gave me a job. I tried it out, and this is kind of where I start to find my career market fit, I'll call it, where I was much better at running companies and helping to scale them and dealing with people like every day who have different tasks to do in whatever department they're in, and allocating the dollars not to investments in companies, but to investments in your own company and the resources that you want to allocate them to. And so for the past like 10 years or so, I worked my way up from FP&A, which for those who don't know what that silly acronym is, it's financial planning and analysis. And it's basically the people who budget for the company, how many people you can hire, what you can buy with it. And I used that to become a CFO 2.5 years ago.
So CFO 2.5 years ago, when did Mostly Metrics come into play for you?
The first post I wrote was December of 2020.
Okay.
And I wrote probably for like close to 2 years with just like 400 subscribers.
I think a lot of people listening can maybe lean into that statement. What gave you what were you interested in when you started writing? Because I'm sure CFO, probably pretty busy, time probably wasn't grown on trees for you. What was the impetus behind taking time out to write, especially when you had an audience that, I don't want to diminish it, but wasn't necessarily growing rapidly, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I could barely get my mother-in-law and my dog to read it if he could read. I have always learned through writing. Like I fully believe that you only rent an idea until you teach somebody else what it means or how to do something. And I had a lot going on in life at the time. I was working at a fast-growing software company. I was also trying to start my own company on the side on nights and weekends with my wife. It was in the tourism industry. So I've always had like an entrepreneurial streak to me, and I obviously don't do well with spare time. And I started to get nervous. Like, people are paid for the playbook they have as a CFO. If I want to become one, I don't want to forget what I'm learning on the job right now. And so I started to write. And what I found was at first what I was writing about, no one cared about at all. I was doing like these very intricate case studies on like business ideas that I had. And what I found was, and this took me over a year to figure out, that nobody cared about my crappy business ideas, but what they liked was the way that I talked about metrics and the way that I explained financial concepts in plain English, and made it fun along the way with memes and GIFs. So I talked about finding your career market fit, or whatever we want to call it there. This was me finding my audience market fit, because
Right.
to your point, Jared, it was like 2 years with like 400 people. I remember begging my friend Sal in my mother's kitchen to subscribe to my newsletter to become my 400th. And he texted me the other day and he said, "You hit 60,000. I guess you don't have to beg people anymore." And I'm like, I'm not too proud to beg. I'll beg anybody.
Well, let's talk about the metrics of where it's at right now. I mean, it is mostly metrics, but hey, let maybe set the stage, that is, for where it is now, and then we can kind of undo a lot of the stuff you did to grow up, because 400 to 60,000, that's gotta pique people's interest.
Yeah, sure. So at 62,000 subscribers today, a mix of paid and free, and I publish 3 times a week.
I feel like when I reached out to you about being on the podcast, you were still in the 50,000 range.
Maybe I've accelerated some growth. I don't know.
I think so. This hasn't taken us that long to get this put together. So, okay. So, a sizable newsletter compared to where it was, and certainly for most people, for many people, going to be sizable. Obviously, there's bigger. You get 100,000 plus. But I think for the sake of today's conversation, we can call what you're running a pretty sizable newsletter, and you've grown that certainly somewhat rapidly in the last couple of years. I mean, I think if we could, first and foremost, like, let's start talking about how you identified that audience to what you mentioned, and then we can get into how you grew.
It's definitely a journey. So you can reel me back in here, Jared, if I go off the rails. So the audience today is primarily people who are either CFOs or in the office of the CFO in technology. And so I kind of stumbled into this niche because it was where I was working. Now, not everybody is in that group. I would say 25% of people are actual CFOs, chief financial officers. 20% are entrepreneurs who want to be smarter on how to allocate dollars across their business, or launch new product lines, or the metrics to track success. Like, what does good even look like? And they enjoy benchmarks. And then the balance are either investors or people who are just curious about business models. The type of person who walks into a bakery and instead of like looking at the menu, they're like, well, how many muffins do they have to sell to keep this place in business? Like that. If that's you,
that's
saying
me.
that. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. There are people like that out there, like myself. To the chagrin of my wife, she's like, oh, can we just order a donut here? Do you really have to calculate their overhead? Those are the people that read the newsletter. Those are the people that read the newsletter today. But at first I started out probably just trying to write for CJ of 5 years ago. That was my target audience.
When did you learn, and how did you learn? I'm sure it was iterative, what people really wanted versus what you were sending them.
It took me a while. I actually emailed Lenny Rachitsky. I'm a huge fan of his. He just hit, I think, like 1 million subscribers today. It's absolutely bonkers. But I remember I emailed him to take a look at something I had written, and I was like so surprised that he even answered me, because who am I? Like a guy with a couple hundred subscribers. And he said that you have to make this immediately useful to somebody and be able to picture who they are. And ideally, it's something that they can do to improve what they do at work so they can make more money. And I think I was like dancing around those topics, but I was writing for like this fictional smart person that I thought was out there. And I had to actually dial in like what this person looked like, what they read each morning, where they maybe lived in the world, what types of companies they worked for. And once I became more specific on that, I could kind of think about the topics better of what would make them successful at work.
It's funny because when I hear that, 25% of your audience is CFOs and you're over 60,000 subscribers now, like, I feel like, okay, there's not that many CFOs in the world. Like, is that too narrow of an audience? But obviously you have different people, different types of people that really like your newsletter. How, for people listening who are struggling with identifying their audience, who are concerned with being too narrow, or on the other side being too broad, how do you help them think about those concepts?
It's such a great question. And I even asked myself that today, am I being too narrow? But I've luckily stumbled into a niche that's extremely valuable, because CFOs control the budgets for their whole company. They make big buying decisions, not only for the finance department. So maybe they're buying like a financial software that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're also telling other people in the company, usually the CEO, that's the dirty secret, that it's not usually the CEO making the decision at these larger companies. They're going to their CFO and saying, can we afford this? And the CFO is the ultimate person who approves it. So like, that's a pretty lucrative place to be. And once again, like I stumbled into this, then like trying to sell, I don't know, like clothing to mothers, which is like a B2C brand, and nothing wrong with that. Like I'm in a strong B2B niche where it monetizes better on like a per subscriber basis. But back, I guess, to what you were asking is like, how do you find that person over time? I think a lot of it was figuring out who was actually writing back to me when I sent something out, and then looking up who they were after. And then it started to like coalesce on this, like what I call like a white hot center.
That makes sense. Going back to what you said about making sure that somebody can take action on what you're saying in the email, kind of changing the topic or changing the way you write it. Any strategies or tips people can utilize? Any like kind of go-tos when they have a concept? They're like, I want to write about this. How do I now make sure that it's applicable to someone to take action on right now?
Well, the first thing I would do is think about it selfishly, like if you would use that, because you probably shouldn't be writing about things that wouldn't be useful to yourself. And so at first I look at it through the lens of, is this something I've Googled 100 times, or something that I find really interesting and can't find the answer to, or something that I just feel like there's an angle that hasn't been explored here. And that's like my starting point. So my tip there would be to actually write really selfishly, but then give away very generously.
I think when it comes to, we can kind of transition into maybe the larger topic here, which is how to come up with content ideas in general. Like whether you have a content idea and you need to figure out how to deliver value is one thing, but where do you start with content ideas? You email a pretty decent amount, in terms of your frequency. And I would imagine now 4 or 5 years in, like where are you going to for all these ideas?
At first, I was nervous that I'd run out of stuff to talk about, and I haven't yet. And I think it's because of like how I've developed my worldview. And this is something I'll steal from Ben Thompson of Stratechery. He said, like, I don't get burnt out because it's now just like me expressing the way that I view business. And it's kind of like you have this lens on all day. It's just a reflection of how you see the world. So for me, I just listen to other podcasts. I read other newsletters. I even reread some of my own stuff, and I always come up with other topics. And the biggest hack has been starting a podcast, because I can invite people on who are smarter than myself, and they'll say something completely compelling, and I'll use that as like the headline. And I always think if you can come up with the headline for something, you can write the rest of the article. It's like if you can come up with the headline and title, the rest will flow into place. And that's been a good starting point for the topics.
The idea of content for newsletters is not a new one, certainly, and trying to come up with content or ideas for newsletters isn't new. But at the same time, you're doing it in a way that is around a really technical topic. Like you are a technical CFO, so I don't want to offend you, but perhaps many people might find the content a little dry. Certainly not like going to go viral type stuff, maybe not the stuff that you post on Instagram, but at the same time, maybe you do, and you've attracted that audience. Talk about creating content that is helpful versus viral, and if that matters as much or has mattered in your journey to growing your audience.
Well, you're not wrong. I mean, CFOs are the type of people that wear like a belt and suspenders to work because they don't want their pants to fall down. I think my hack is something that like I think is hard to replicate. I remember I had a coach once, and he said, you may have the recipe, but you don't have the ingredients. Like, I'm not worried about people copying me, because I feel like my voice is my voice, and that's like my edge. Like, you can't out be CJ. You can't out CJ. And I'm not saying like I'm better than anybody else. I'm just saying I'm unique in the way that I talk. Like I'm definitely not smarter than a lot of even my readers who write back way more intelligent things. But what I can do is make something, I would say like a better on-ramp to something that is complex, because there have been so many times where I've read something that's interesting, but then I feel intimidated, and I never want people to feel intimidated about the topic. So I think like, how do I make this more accessible to someone and just put it in plain English? Because I think people like to write in a way that's extremely smart, using big words and to show off how smart they are. But I've found there's like no shame in the game of like dumbing it down to make it easily approachable for others. And in that, people actually appreciate it.
I first heard about you through Chanel and her reverse growth and reverse newsletter, actually, and whatnot. And she had a similar comment about you in the first part of her write up. She was basically like, "Hey, the most compelling thing about this, I think she commented on your dad jokes, actually." So,
Oh yeah.
Which right there with you, man. Love those. And so, she had commented on something very similar, like, "Hey, dry topic, but he takes a unique approach." I think that sometimes perhaps that's somewhat of a missing ingredient for people is you don't have to have the newest, greatest idea necessarily, but the way you approach it, or at least the way you break it down and talk about it, can be the unique factor in what you're emailing about.
Yeah, I mean, like, how many ways can you make net dollar retention interesting? Like, I've actually found a couple, and I think of each thing I write about as kind of like a puzzle piece and like this larger business mosaic. And I always reserve the right to come back and redo it if I think of something better. But yeah, to your point, it's like, how do you look at something that is dry from the outside and like bring in pop culture references or something? Like my favorite show is The Wire on HBO. It's an old one, but like I'm always putting Wire gifs in there, or like Marty Bird from Ozark. It's like, how do you take something that blends two worlds really? Because I think like an insight that I've stumbled upon is that it's the same people who like a lot of the same finance stuff I like also like sports, also like pop culture, also like things that like may not immediately feel like they're tangential, but it can make something a lot more enjoyable to read.
You mentioned the value of having a podcast for your newsletter because it gives you content to talk about in your newsletter. Unpack that a little bit, for someone who's struggling with concepts to write about and maybe is looking at that, like, what does that look like on paper and how do they leverage that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I interview two CFOs, and sometimes I'll do an investor, sometimes I'll do someone from the marketing department, but basically people that would be interesting to other financially minded folks like myself, generally people who work and scale tech companies. And what that's done is given me a chance to kind of ride shotgun with somebody as they go through their mental process of like how they scale a business, how they monetize, whether through a SaaS model, transactional model, usage based, and interesting stories from their career. And then what it gives me is like this raw ammunition to come back to and then riff on myself. So sometimes somebody will give me a line. I'll just be like, oh, I never thought about it that way. And I can use that as like my starting point. Like I said, for the title, a lot of times I'll get the title names just from having somebody on the podcast, and then I can write the rest.
Right.
And then other times I'll take full quotes from the podcast, and it's a nice flywheel too, Jared, because I can always link back to the podcast.
Yep.
So the newsletter will drive growth for the podcast as well.
Yep. Makes total sense. We should do that more here on this podcast. I think I'm going to take a note or two. Okay, let's get into growth. Let's talk about growth and the growth component here. You're sitting at 400 subscribers. You're at 60,000 plus. Like, maybe talk through some of the significant growth points and what you think were behind them.
Yeah. Well, people talk about growth hacks a lot, which I fall victim to reading into all of them. I always I'm looking for those, and then I take a step back. I'm just like, just write great stuff, and people will share it. Like that's the key ingredient. So that's like my disclaimer. Write really good stuff that's useful. But if you're looking for like ways to amplify that once you write it, what I did at first, and this was like pre-Elon takeover, but I made a list in an Excel spreadsheet of 20 terms or phrases in the world that I was in. And every night while sitting on the couch and watching TV with my wife, I would search for those terms on Twitter, and I would comment something insightful if somebody posted about it, and then also link back, like, and also if you're interested in reading more on this topic, here you go. And that helped me get over 1,000, and then essentially to, I think, like 8,000 or 10,000. And I could trace most of the bursts in subscribers back to those like exogenous shocks, or posting on Twitter, or like another thing we can talk about too, if you want, is like guest posting for companies. But owning real estate on Twitter, I call it real estate, but like basically owning a term. Like if you were going to search for net dollar retention in that like 12-month period, like I was going to come up no matter what. And it was an extremely specific and niche word and phrase, but like I had written the most recent like thought leadership on it.
And that got you to 10K. I mean, you can almost trace that as like a huge growth lever in your initial start, path. We'll call that a path to like 5K, 5-figure number of followers.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that tactic would still work today? Or
Absolutely
I know
not.
no. Okay. But you can take the same topic or the same concept and apply it to other areas.
It doesn't have to be just on Twitter. It can be anywhere. It's like, how do
Yeah.
you position yourself? And
I was
it is
thinking
that like
LinkedIn.
reply guy thing. And you can't just say like, this is cool. Great work. Check out my thing. You have to actually say something back. I remember one of the terms I wrote about was employee stock options, or there's a really specific term in the finance world called the 409A. It's basically what's the price of your options. And I like dominated that section of Twitter. And it was when a lot of stuff was going on during COVID with crazy funding rounds and also some layoffs after. And like if you searched for stuff involving employee equity or employee stock options, I was there.
What other levers have you used? You got to 10,000 plus subscribers. What else has driven growth from a high level?
I worked with some great brands at first, and I offered to write stuff for their websites and blogs for free. That's not the case anymore. I won't do it for free necessarily, but it gave me lended credibility. It was like this mutual thing where they only had so many resources internally. It would be great if they could have someone who was actually a financial expert write on a specific topic like cash burn and budgeting. Because a lot of times the people in the marketing department, they're really good, but like they don't come from a finance background. So they're like, hey, I'll take the help if I can get it. And it was like free labor for them. And so the next thing you know, you go to like Brex's website or Mercury's website or some of these bigger companies that I was like shocked they wanted to work with me. And I'm on there. So it like makes me look good to be associated with a big brand. And then I benefit from the SEO.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to this is the guest posting you were teasing earlier, right? Yeah. Is that just straight outreach? And I'm guessing there's some credibility just because you are an active CFO at the time. You've got that credibility going for you. Like, what other things were they interested in to give you that opportunity?
Well, a lot of them were relationships that I built over time, and then and then after a while, I was like, "Hey, would it be cool if I ever did a guest post?" Like if somebody just off the street pings these people and says, "Hey, can I write this?" They're like, first, do you know your stuff, and second of all, do you have any sort of presence? So at that point, I probably had 5,000 subscribers or something, and so it's like, okay, he has some people that like will vouch that like he's interesting enough or smart enough. And then having worked in that field was also helpful. But like it was pretty easy for me to come up with a list of like 5 companies, and then I said, do I have a personal relationship with anybody over there?
It's beginning to sound like you really have a kind of be everywhere sort of strategy. You're flooding Twitter with high quality responses to very specific, targeted, well thought out terms. You're going after companies that have prominence in your space. You've got a backing in terms of your resume to kind of show that you can add value, but you're being targeted about that approach. Anywhere else where that played out?
LinkedIn, but that's been more so recently. I don't think I did much on LinkedIn for the first couple of years, especially because I still had the CFO gig at the time and I didn't want it to look like I was prioritizing this over the company,
Right.
or make any of the investors feel like I wasn't concentrating, because I was. So I think it was mostly Twitter at first, and then the guest posts.
Yeah. Has this ever gotten to a point where you feel like the subscribers have almost become a little bit of a it's picked up momentum on its own? In essence, it's like a snowball that's kind of rolling down a hill. Has it ever reached that point where you felt like it wasn't as much work to grow the subscriber base?
Yeah, I vividly remember this one point where I was in the kitchen getting a snack and I still had like the notifications on for whenever I got a free subscriber. Now I just only keep on the email notifications for paid subscribers. But at that point, it was like, I think this just produces 50 subscribers a day, every day, no matter what I do. And before that, it was like maybe it was 5 to 10 subscribers a day. And you could trace it back to like, oh, it was that Twitter thread that got 30 likes on it or something. It was at that point, like at around 8,000, and recommendations definitely helped with this on Substack, that feature, which we can talk about too, my approach to that. But it was at that point, I think it just started to generate that many. And since then, it's just been like a steady linear growth of between 1,500 and 2,000 new subscribers every month. And it really doesn't, I would say over the last 2 years, it doesn't deviate a ton from that.
It can be a little bit demotivating to go out and do that, podcast guest appearance or something, because you're like, well, it probably won't affect podcast or newsletter subscribers one way or the other that much.
No, I'm testing to see if that's still the case.
All right. Well, we'll see what we can do here. We'll see if we can move the needle enough for you.
Hey everyone, Spencer here, founder of Niche Pursuits. Are you adding a new internal link pointing to each article you publish? You should be. Ever find it time-consuming and a bit overwhelming? Remembering what content you publish and deciding which anchor text to use can be a real headache. What if there was a better way? Well, that's exactly why I created Link Whisper. Simply click Add Inbound Internal Links, and Link Whisper will scan your site in seconds and suggest the most relevant links with appropriate anchor text for your new article. Now simply check the box next to the internal links you want to add, and Link Whisper will add these links for you. No need to go into each article, edit, and add the link. It's already done. No more manual internal link building or guesswork. Just efficient, accurate linking that saves you time and improves your SEO. Transform your content strategy with Link Whisper. Start linking smarter, not harder. Use the coupon code podcast for $15 off. Head over to linkwhisper.com and use coupon code podcast to get $15 off.
Well, you mentioned it a bit, so let's get into just the different ways you monetize. And I think that's going to be a topic that I'd like to go as deep as we need to. And just because I think the audience is going to really love hearing different ideas. You have a free side of the list. You have a paid side of the list. Maybe if it's okay with you, let's start there and hear kind of the journey behind a free and paid list. A lot of people don't have a paid list. They just send it all free and then resort to other tactics to earn money for their newsletter. Like, where did you land when it came to that? And when did you make that decision?
Yeah, so the order of, I guess, paid operations here, it went turning on paid, then ads, then more ads with another newsletter, then the podcast, which is ads, and then dinners and events, and then data reports. And so I'll go back to what you said, and then if you want, you can pick any of those, kind of like a choose your own adventure, I guess. I turned on paid subs at 11,000, and
Okay.
I was very, very nervous to do it.
I bet. So 11,000, you broke the 10,000 mark. Any other reason behind it being that number?
I think I just wanted it to be 10,000, honestly. Yeah. I over prioritized how important like just going live was going to be, because it's like a singles game. After that, it's not a home run. And I think a lot of people are like, I'll wait till I get to this certain point and then I'll flip the switch and I'll just be raining in money. It's like, that is not the case. Like, it is an absolute grind once you turn on paid.
Do you recommend people do it earlier in the journey, later in the journey? Is it kind of is it a one size fits all approach, or is it very nuanced?
I think it depends what your content is about, and if in like how useful it is to your audience. So if it's something that's like humor or an opinion column, or if it's basically anything that's not something that you can put into a financial model, I would wait until you have some size. But if it's something that like they can expense at work and it's giving them data on something, like a lot of the investor newsletters, you could turn on paid on day one and people are going to expense, but it could even be like $50 a month. It could be really expensive. But otherwise, I'd say just like rule of thumb, probably 5,000 free. Mm-hmm. That's enough too, because what I was afraid of is like also like some of my best stuff lives behind paid, and it's like, oh, well, it's kind of depressing that only that percentage of people reads it. So that was always in the background.
How does that look in terms of, maybe walk through like what you send on a weekly basis to the free versus the paid?
Yeah. So at this point, I have a Sunday send, which has one ad sponsor. I have a Tuesday send that has one ad sponsor, and then a Thursday post, which goes out to everyone, but it's paywalled about, call it 20% of the way down if you're scrolling. And the difference between them is subtle but important. So the Sunday posts are mostly about valuation, where the market is if you're a tech CFO, what the latest operational benchmarks are for public companies that are comparable to your business model. And then the Tuesday post is usually about metrics themselves, just like writing stories about, like I said, net dollar retention rate or customer acquisition cost, and diving into those. Or maybe it's something I learned about pricing. So those usually are probably like 1,000 words in length. And then the Thursday posts are longer in their playbooks with templates that people love. Templates. That's a big tip for people. People love templates that are immediately useful to something like annual planning or setting like a sales rep's commission. So it's very, very much like a playbook and a deeper dive.
And this is all the paid, or this is
that's the paid, what I was describing there.
Yep.
And so those ones take a lot of work to do. And so like I always go back and forth, like what is it worth it to keep those behind a paywall? But I continue to think that it is.
Yeah. What does the free list get? And is it different? Do you leverage the same topics? How frequently are you emailing the free list?
Yeah, so the free gets emailed 3 times a week, but they can only read part of the Thursday post. And so that's something that people don't talk about, how many people unsubscribe whenever you send a paywalled post. So I'm at a decent size now where it's not as much of a gut punch, but like just for reference, every time I send a Thursday paywalled post, I probably lose 150 to 200 free subscribers. So you just have to look at the dollars and say, is that worth losing some of your readers? Or were they never going to pay anyway?
Yep.
Either. But then then you talk yourself in a circle of, well, is your advertising getting kind of crushed by that because you have less readers? So you just got to continue to grow to keep it going up and to the right over time and win back people. But maybe they were never in my core target.
What percentage, whatever you're comfortable sharing, makes up your paid list? I know there's kind of some industry benchmarks, but just to give people an idea, if they're new to this idea of a paid versus a free, like what are some classic things they can anticipate, or anything from your data set that you can share?
Yeah, sure. So Substack has, I think, like this fancy orange badge on there, which means that there's over 1,000 paid subscribers now. I don't have like 5,000 or 10,000 paid subscribers, so it's under that. And the advertising at this point makes more money than the paid subscribers, but it's still substantial. And it's something that like I just have to realize I'm playing a different game. Like you can't just raise your ad rates as like overnight. Once you get to a certain point, you have to increase prices at a slower rate because you'll price some people out. Whereas subscribers, like I said, it's just a steady slope up. So right now it's below, but like I anticipate that in 2 years it could potentially be above what I'm charging for advertising. So
right.
It's like just which games are you playing?
It is, even as I'm asking the questions and trying to layer the different questions in, I'm like, okay, there's a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of moving parts. So
yeah.
What are you charging per month? Has that moved at all since you started for the paid newsletter? And what have you learned about price points as they relate to paid newsletters?
So I think a lot of the pricing is actually just around the packaging and the length of term. And so what I think a lot of creators mess up on is not asking for a longer commitment from sponsors. So like I had a full-time job, and so this was part of like the necessity. Like I could not be selling one newsletter post like that. Like I just did not have time for that. And luckily I have a great partner in Matthew, who's my full-time sales guy now. So I don't have to do any of that. But I insist that if you're going to work with me, it has to be a quarterly package for anything. So it has to be 3 months. So that means for the newsletter, you get 13 cents, or for the podcast, you get 24 host read ads, or 8 per month. And it's great for both sides because you have to remember that I'm selling to CFOs, and they're not the type of person who's going to read one article and be like, you know what? $200,000 on Workday. I'm going to buy, I love this newsletter. I've read it once. I'm going to buy that. Like it just doesn't happen. You have to build a relationship with them over time. So they are quarterly packages. And so when I first started, I was getting like, call it 2,000 a post, but it's I don't want to give like specific numbers, but it's at least, 4 or 5 times higher than that per post if you were to look at the packages. But I'm running a B2B business now, which is like to call out. Like I don't just put every dollar in my pocket. Like it now is a B2B media business. And it's like an enterprise sales motion. So like a lot of people start out where they have these pages where people can go and just like buy one newsletter post, which is more convenient than trying to sell one newsletter post. But for me, like I'm talking to CMOs and trying to unlock like a big part of their budget.
The way you structured the packaging, that was something that I thought was interesting, is minimum of quarterly. And then you also have the ability to tie the podcast in. Do brands really lean in? Like, do they like that, having multiple channels they're getting their brand in front of? Like, how vital has that actually been? I know that you had both available at the time, but like for someone who maybe doesn't have a podcast, but is thinking, I could pull a podcast off, like how important has that been for what you charge and what brands are interested in?
It's way easier to sell them together. And it's a great question, Jared. And what I've found is like you have like the ground game, which is the newsletter, and that is very attractive to the growth teams who want to know the clicks and be able to trace it back. And then there's a second group in the marketing department, which is the brand team. And that's the air game with the podcast. So I can go to both and dip into each of their budgets and say, listen, I know you want this. I know you want this. What I find with readers is they like to consume both. And then there are some who only read one. I think if we combine these two together, your presence will be there. And whether it comes back as someone typing it into Google, okay, maybe Google always takes all the credit anyway, but like I can show you the metrics on like how many listens we're getting, how many views we're getting. And I think you're going to feel pretty comfortable that by the third month, somebody's going to come back and buy something.
That is compelling. It's very compelling right there. And you're, to some degree, like you said already, it also helps with the content production side of things. Like the podcast actually helps you with the newsletter. So not only are you utilizing a strategy that helps you produce more content, better content, more wide-ranging content, but then brands are more willing to pay a higher amount of money and more brands are attracted to it because you have all those components.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Well, we'll just call the podcast now at this point. No, I'm just kidding.
Let's keep going.
I know this is a faster pace than normal, and I love it. I think we're gonna get like twice the value out of you because you are just quick hits with the answers, and it's awesome. Keep it up. Keep it up. That's the advertising side of things. What's been the most successful way to find advertisers, and was that hard in the beginning? Getting that first advertiser for a lot of people is the hardest thing, but where have you consistently found works well to maximize who you get in front of?
I will always shout out Brex and their head of corporate development, Art Levy, because he was reading my newsletter at like 5,000 subscribers. And he reached out to me and said, dude, I love this. Could we sponsor like 6 posts or something? And I was barely charging anything at the time. I was like, holy shit, like this company wants to work with me. This is legit. And he had actually found me because I'd done a guest post for their marketing department at one point. And so like it's a nice flywheel too, because then you can reach out to the next company. Maybe it's NetSuite. And they don't compete with Brex or anything, but it's like another tool in the finance stack, and say, listen, I've been working with Brex. They're a great brand. They've gotten customers from me. Can I work with you too? And so then you have like this lended credibility from your other sponsors. And then what I did is at the bottom of my newsletter, I said, do you want to reach CFOs? And I think I made it funny. Like, if you want to reach CFOs and tap into their juicy VC marketing budgets, like click here and I'll help you. And so that's been helpful as well. And so, something that you didn't ask me about this, but like my marketing deck, like my sponsorship deck, is like completely wacky. Like it's all written in my voice as if it was like a newsletter post. It's not like corporate speak. And so I think when it lands on the desk of somebody who's vetting this versus 70 other newsletters, they're like, this guy's a character and he put a lot of work into making this enjoyable for me to read. And his personality comes across like against all these other things. This feels a little more interesting.
And goes back to what we talked about earlier, where you're taking a perhaps boring, perhaps dry topic, and that's actually what your newsletter is doing. It's making it interesting. It's making it funny. It's making it something that everybody can at least want to lean into. So it almost matches with the way you write your newsletters.
Yeah. And I think they look at the deck. They're like, so I have this joke for all the readers. And I think it's important to have like inside jokes with your readers that like every 1,000 subscribers, every 1,000 free subscribers, I buy my dog Walter, who's our editor-in-chief, an ice cream. And so like throughout the marketing deck, it's like tons of pictures of me and Walter eating ice cream.
That's cool. Okay. That's cool. Feels almost like an Easter egg of some sort, Like,
yeah, it is.
Yeah, exactly. Now you draw a line. I can't remember where I saw this, if it was in the Growth in Reverse article or if it was in our back and forth, but you do draw a line between sponsorships and advertisements. Maybe, or maybe there's a subtle line there, but like for you, there's ads and there's kind of sponsorships, and you talked about guest posting. You talked about how you still do that, but now you charge for it. Like, what are some other monetization methods that this brand, mostly metrics now, kind of is a part of?
Well, I think it's important to make your sponsors feel valued in like how they're presented. And I take it seriously that like they should get the airtime that they deserve, whether that be like at the top of the newsletter. And I only do one ad per newsletter. And I'm like, this costs a lot, but like, you're the only one in there. And I'm going to position you as like a thought leader here. So I think that's important. And then within the podcast, like I'm not going to put someone who's like directly competing with you in the ad next to you. So like I've always tried to be respectful there. And then in terms of like who you work with, I think is important. Like I have nothing against sports gambling or anything, but like I was approached by a couple big gambling sites who wanted to throw a lot of money. And I said, like, I was like, I want to say yes, but like, this isn't good for my brand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a better story if I can say to sponsors, like, look, we can get sponsors, but we only want to work with like a core 5 group each year. And so I look at it as like more of a partnership program than advertising. And I think they respect that too. And they're willing to take a longer term view. And when you do that, it elevates the conversation from transactional to like, oh, you actually care if I hit my goals this year as a marketer. And that's resonated a lot.
That's cool. That's cool. Going back to the paid newsletter versus the free newsletter. I think I saw paid newsletters $15 a month. I think I have that right.
Yeah.
A couple months free if you do annual. On that side of things, how have you found pricing to work there? Is it the same as when you started? Have you adjusted it? What have you learned along the way with the paid newsletter side of things?
I raised it once, and I had a huge influx of people before I raised it because I sent out it was a meme from The Wire where it's Marlo Stanfield saying the price of the brick going up, and is like get on board and get your subscription today before I raise it. And I had a bunch come in then, but then I found that was like the line between what was probably too expensive, because then if you think about it, I'm actually more than a Netflix subscription. And they probably have more it's not as educational, but they have more content than me. And so I think what I realized is like you're competing with everything that people consume, whether it's their Spotify subscription, their Netflix subscription, their Wall Street Journal. And at any given time, like how many are you going to have?
Right.
7, 8, 10. I mean, some people probably have 20, but like it's you start competing against things that you didn't think you were competing against. So for me, I found that I wanted to price it at $15 a month or $150 a year, which is the equivalent of 2 months free if you go annual. And I wanted to leave enough room that every once in a while I could do a discount and still feel comfortable with it. It's high enough that if I ran a discount for $12.50 or $12, I wouldn't be angry about a bunch of people converting.
Right. Okay. Good. Okay. Anything I didn't ask you about on the monetization side of things before we move on? There's a lot there.
Yeah. And I mean, my newsletter is partially about monetization, so I'm such a nerd for this. What I found is that I have an audience of smart people who are decision makers, and it's statistically significant. So I can start to do surveys and reports that will monetize well too. And they're immediately useful for the people who download and read them. And so this week I'm actually coming out with my first report, which is the 2025 finance tech stack. So I got over 1,000 of the readers to answer what tools they use that they love to get the job done each day. And then I benchmarked that by how big their companies were in terms of revenue size anonymously. And so this is like me dipping my toe into water of like, I look at monetization as like not one thing, but like a layer cake strategy. And this next layer I'm putting on, Jared, is like data. Now, how do I use data to make money and also to make the newsletter better and make the podcast better? Because then I have things to talk about.
That is fascinating. That's your data report. That's the line item you mentioned for data reports.
Exactly.
I also wrote down dinners. You mentioned dinners.
Yeah. I'm hosting 20 CFOs for dinner tomorrow night in New York City. I get very nervous before each one. This is like me just being a weirdo. I'm like, what if no one shows up? Even though like they all told me they're coming. But like that part of me, I just will never get over that. And we've done 4 of them so far. And so what we do is you have to take this leap of faith that you'll pay for the venue and the dinner and everything, but then you can go get sponsors. And so what you do is you have call it 20 CFOs in a room, and then 4 sponsors who pay a couple grand each, which pays for minimally the bill. And then they get to send like their founder, chief revenue officer to come and hang out with the CFOs. Because it's really hard to get CFOs. I mean, I don't leave my computer that much or my house, like to get them all in one place. And so that's kind of like events, but on a smaller scale.
Yep. Wow, man, a lot of irons in the fire here. Okay. I want to make sure we have some time to talk about kind of just, I mean, we're talking with a CFO, a financial guy, but really a numbers guy. Like, what are the metrics you're tracking as it relates to your brand, as it relates to your newsletter? Which ones have you found to be the most important? KPIs, like let's wade into that at least for a few minutes so we hear from you on that.
Yeah. So I messed this up at first. I thought that likes were really important. And then I figured out that less than 1% of my audience actually has the Substack app downloaded. And in order to like something, you have to be on the app or be signed in on your web browser.
Yeah.
So it's like none of these people are even eligible to read it. So like when I send something out, it'll get, call it 35,000 views within the first out of the 60,000. And because it's a combination of like opens and also on the web within like the first day. And then I'm like, how the hell did I only get 12 likes? I'm like, wow, this piece must have sucked. And then I look and everybody's sharing it. And I'm like, oh, it's just because like these CFOs honestly probably don't even know how to like log into this thing. Yeah. Okay, whatever. But like, I was like, okay, I was following that metric and just going for likes. But the difference between 30 likes and 40 likes on a post versus 35,000 views and 50,000 views, like those are two different things. What I found is it's still like a word of mouth game. And with email, it's already built in that like word of mouth is just forwarding something. So the number one metric I look for is number of times something was shared, because it'll tell you how many times it was forwarded. And then this isn't a metric, but like, well, I guess it is. Number of people who write an email back to me saying that I like this or thank you for writing it. I think that's the most powerful signal. If someone responds, takes time out of their day to write something back, like that's way better than a like.
The Substack, you talk about the Substack a little bit. So let's quickly touch on it because you mentioned it earlier. You landed on Substack. You obviously, I mean, I know platform-wise, there's a bunch of places you can put your email these days and whatnot. What are the things you like about Substack? You mentioned recommendations earlier. Anything else on the Substack topic?
Yeah, I looked at it as a place where there were other newsletters that I aspired to be like, and I looked at some of the other providers. I won't like say this provider out loud, but like I'm not saying everybody on their platform is a crypto scammer, but all the crypto scammers are definitely on there. I was like, I'm writing about finance stuff and trying to help like enterprise software brands sell. And it's like, everybody like, what's the Groucho Marx quote? It's like, I don't want to be a part of a club that wants me as a member. Like I wanted to aspire to be a part of like a club of like people that seemed really smart and also were like respected in their fields. And so I looked at people like Lenny. I looked at people like the Pragmatic Engineer. I looked at people like Edwin Dorsey of the Bear Cave, and I was like, these people are professionals at what they do. They really respect their craft, and I want to be associated with them.
It's a good method for decision making in general. It's like some of these decisions can feel really overwhelming and really big, especially when it's something like maybe that isn't up your wheelhouse. But if you just look around at colleagues or people that you respect, that you look up to, that you want to be like, and you're like, well, seems to be a consistent thread of what they're doing. That kind of makes my decision a lot easier.
And I mean, this helps as you get bigger, but like the Substack people were great to me when I asked for advice. And like, I've even been out to their headquarters and like spoken with their employees. And it's like, they want me to win. Like I want to work with somebody who also wants me to win.
Just like your advertisers. Last question from me. It's open-ended. I had it down here only if I had time. I have time for one more. So
okay.
One thing we didn't talk about as it relates to lead generation, as it relates to getting new subscribers, is whether you offer any sort of lead magnets, whether you offer any sort of incentives, whether you do any sort of advertising to get people in the boat. You mentioned templates are great. I wrote that down, but just the final question is a little off topic. I'm going back to something because I have time. Are you doing any of these sorts of methods to increase your subscriber base?
No. I've only ran one ad and it was for 2 days and it was a joke. So I took my brother's roommate from college who I'm friends with, and I put his face on an ad for Mostly Metrics and did it on a Reddit thread that I knew that he would read. So he was scrolling through like, what the hell? Why am I on here? But no, I've never done any ads. Why? Because I just don't think CFOs are like going for banner ads on Twitter or even on LinkedIn. And part of like, I think why people like reading my stuff is that I'm a person. I'm not coming at you like a corporation who's just doing this hard sell. And like I want as many subscribers as possible, but I also want the right ones. So I'm not trying to attract like the widest net of people who like, because I'm running a business now too, even though I'm an individual, like they won't monetize well. They're not going to enjoy my content. They're not going to stick around. So I haven't done anything ad wise to like try to move the needle there.
It's good. It's good. It's good to hear. 60,000 subscribers and counting without any sort of advertising or freebies or offers or anything. I mean, it's really compelling. You're doing a great job. You brought so much value in, I guess we're at 45 plus minutes, but thank you so much for coming on board here and sharing. I really appreciate it. I'll share the website where people can go get on your email list, mostlymetrics.com, and we'll include a link to that. Anywhere else people can follow along with what you're doing?
Yeah, mostlymetrics.com. I also have a podcast called Run the Numbers. I probably should have just named it Mostly Metrics, but just go to mostlymetrics.com and you'll get everything you need, because I have the podcast on there as well.
Okay. CJ, thanks, man. I really appreciate you coming on board. I learned a ton, and I appreciate you sharing so much. Congrats on your success, and we'll keep following along.
Thank you, sir. It's podcasts like this that I enjoy too. It helps me get better at my craft. So if I can share like one thing that helps somebody else, pay it forward.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again. I'm sure you shared a lot of that, so that's how I feel. We'll talk again soon. Thanks, CJ.
Thanks.